God has blessed us in our time without a lead pastor with so many great things. And I'd like to just invite Alan Coleman to come on up. He's going to speak to us this morning. You're in for a little different vibe than you're used to from our general speakers that we've had recently, I would say. A little different vibe coming from this guy.
Oh, just a little bit, yeah.
He's a great bro in the Lord. We just grown to love him so much and his family. And today, by the way, is his 1-year anniversary of being here at SCBC. So why don't you just welcome him by saying, take it away, Mr. Allen.
Tell you a story is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you a few stories, but one in particular. And it all starts with a guy named Edward Murphy. Edward Murphy was born in 1918, and he was an aerospace engineer who worked on safety-critical systems. Everything went wrong. He had all sorts of things go wrong. Everything blew up in his face. Nothing ever seemed to go right for poor Ed. Edward Murphy is most noted for Murphy's Law. Now, I've heard Murphy's Law stated in a bunch of different ways. I've heard it stated this way. If there's more than one possible outcome of a job or task, and one of those outcomes will result in disaster or an undesirable consequence, somebody's going to do it that way. Some of you have worked with these people. I've heard it said, whatever can go wrong will go wrong in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. Or let me put it to you this way. When I'm in the kitchen and I'm making a sandwich and I'm putting spread on my slice of bread or butter or whatever, without fail, I will drop it. And I've not once, ever in the history of my life, had it not land butter side down on the floor. Every time. That's Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law, at its simplest definition, says if anything can go wrong, it will. This is true. It doesn't matter who you are. You cannot escape Murphy's Law, I've found. The pendulum will swing into times of your life when it's true and it's got a hold of you and it's changing things and you're living through it. And the pendulum will swing the other way where you feel like Murphy's Law has no effect on you, that you live outside of its boundaries. This is true for me. It's very true for me. Murphy's Law, my early life, it was all about Murphy's Law. I grew up in a house. I don't remember my parents ever hugging or kissing. In fact, most of my life, I just remember them in separate bedrooms. And so I have no context what it looks like to see mom and dad functioning. So that's what I grew up in. There's divorce everywhere, aunts, uncle. Divorce was common. So for me, as you can imagine, taking that into my marriage is going to pose some challenges, having never seen a healthy one. And, so they got divorced when I was 16. I got ripped out of the house that I grew up in and loved. And it did some really interesting things for me, including I got my girlfriend pregnant at 17, who's now my wife. So I joined the United States Marine Corps. I figured it was the best way to take care of a family. That was dumb. But it did so many good things for me. It did so many things for my integrity. It did so many things for my responsibility, for my leadership. So I came out on the other side of my time in the Marine Corps, ready to approach the business world head on. And I'll tell you what, I swung right outside of Murphy's Law. Because it was great, man. I mean, there was no season in my life that went longer than maybe 6 months without some sort of promotion or change in pay for the better. I worked my way up the corporate ladder, ultimately landing in a very large Fortune 500 company, reporting in at the executive level of the company, which, by the way, I was the youngest to ever do that. I was real proud of myself. Money was good. House was good. The car was good. Credit score was good. It's the only time in my life I can remember seeing a credit score over 700. It was good. And then, as I did this more and more, then something happened. we had our second kid, Tyler. I'll tell you maybe his whole story another day, and I'll tell you my whole story maybe another time. But what you need to know is that Tyler lost oxygen at birth, and it destroyed much of his brain. My son isn't going to walk. He's not going to talk. He's not going to tell Dad, I love you. Not going to play catch with Tyler. And I got angry. That surely, if this circumstance is possible, if this circumstance is happening, then surely God must not be with me. And even if he is, I don't want any part of a God like that. And so I lived my life that way for the next year. But over that next year, Tyler's life, Tyler's purpose, Tyler's plan the entire time was that Tyler needed to be with a family who would take care of him for the rest of his life until it was time for him to go home. And he was going to have unique challenges. And you know what? I'm going to pick this family to do it. And oh, by the way, Tyler has a greater purpose, a greater plan. And that plan is to save his dad. And he did. Tyler's life saved his dad. And it changed everything for me. It changed everything for me in the context of how I was living and how I saw the world and how I saw God in my life. So, I began to work with people, and God reached down and he placed a new calling on my life, and he said, and he had me working with people, and he said, you know what, Alan, you're not doing what I want you to do. I want you to do something new. I want you to do something different. Everything that has happened up to now has brought you to this point in time where now I'm going to take you and I'm going to make you a pastor. A pastor. Because that was a unique challenge. I mean, come on, let's talk about this for a second. Becoming a pastor has all sorts of unique challenges. First of all, I hate people. Okay? I did that sermon a few weeks ago. Download it. Anyways, I hate people. I just, there's all sorts of unique challenges in being a pastor, particularly reconciling my life to go from making this much to, well, not making this much. So we were going to build a new house. We pulled out of that. Sold my nice, brand new Nissan Titan. Got rid of that. God called me to plant a church with another guy. And then we swung right back out of Murphy's Law again. Church did well. It grew 700 people. And then swung right back in again as quickly as it went out. God said, you're going to go somewhere different. I'm going to take you out of here. I have another plan for you. I didn't want to go. I went kicking and screaming, and he called me to a place in Santa Cruz, California, where I said, finally, I can swing back out of Murphy's Law into a place that's dynamic and moving forward and is not subject to the laws of Murphy. Yeah. First 3 months, I saw the resignation of a senior pastor. So the resignation of an executive pastor, and I saw a significant portion of the staff leave this place. And I said, what are you doing? Spent months away from my family, her in Florida, me here alone, living with people. That was interesting. Then when she finally got here, we moved 6 times. When we finally found a place that we could land in this ever-increasingly interesting place, we found ourselves no longer able to be homeowners. Instead, we found ourselves subject to someone else's authority renting. So now in my 30s, feeling like I'm moving backwards, I had to pay in to sell my house. Murphy's Law continues to feel like it has effect. And that's what I want to explore a little bit today. The CEO of the company that I worked for, I got to be in his office frequently. And every time I went into his office, he'd lean back behind this big mahogany desk, which is very intimidating. He'd go, Alan, what you got going on big? Big? I reconciled the budget. Losses are good. New season of the office started last week. That's pretty big. I'm big. What do you mean big? I'm big. Because this was a person who embodied the word, big. What you got going on big? This is a guy who was flown around in his private jet regularly, acquiring and merging new companies. He was playing golf with people like Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson. He lived in the same neighborhood that Tiger Woods did. This was the guy who had plenty going on big. It was intimidating. He had asked that question by this guy regularly. And what he was trying to do with great regularity was to get me to see that there was more. There was a bigger plan. There was a bigger part that I had in this company and what was at stake. And that's what this morning is about. See, I don't know about you guys, but there's some weeks that I'm clicking and I'm tracking with what the teacher's saying up here. I'm jiving and I'm hearing it. And you know what? He's talking about this amazing life and this big plan for me and these great things. And I'm like, yes, that's what I want. And then I go home and I take out the trash. Woo! Big life. Big life. And so there are some things I had to learn to say, some things I had to learn to do, some things I learned along the way about myself, specifically questions that I had to learn through the times that Murphy's Law was actively affecting my life. And I wasn't sure that what exactly was going on in my life even mattered. Let me tell you something. The only reason I feel like I should even be up here, because I got to be honest with you, the insecurity of standing up here in front of a group of people and telling them how to live life is huge. It's the only thing that makes me feel like I deserve to be here in front of a group of people is to take you on a journey of what God's doing with me. I'm going to tell you what he's doing through me right now. That's what I'm going to do this morning. And maybe that does something for you. Maybe you can come along and maybe you can see what I'm seeing. But that's the best I got. And so that's what I'm going to take time to do this morning. How do we reassure ourselves that God is still at work when our greatest adventure may be getting through traffic twice a day? And more importantly, when Murphy's Law seems to have this hold on us. We see it more and more and more, and it's so cliche to say in the church that it comes down to faith. But it does. Faith that though God is silent, he is not absent. But sometimes our faith has a limit. It comes up against circumstance, and it begins to unfold and unravel. And when we think that circumstance predicates God's involvement in our life, waiting for God to reveal himself and tell us he's with us by some reversal of misfortune. Isn't that true? That is for me. So we find ourselves living a life of circumstantial faith at best, hoping he's there. And so that leads us to today's character. Today's story has to be in my top two. It's either this one or Job. I don't know, I like the depressing ones. I relate to them better, I think. This morning takes us to the Old Testament character of Joseph. Now, this isn't Mary and Joseph. This is the story of a 17-year-old shackled ankle to ankle in slavery, son of Jacob, one of 12 brothers. Joseph was the favorite. Any of you in here, were you the favorite growing up? The favorite of your family? Who was the favorite? Let me see you. Come on, you liars. You guys are liars. He was the favorite and he wasn't shy about it. And it ticked his brothers off. So finally they plotted to kill him. We've had enough of this, Mr. Sunshine. But then in an act of compassion, they decided, we'll just sell him into slavery. So they threw him in a cistern, which is an empty well. And when the merchants came by, they sold him for about 8 ounces of silver. That's about what he was worth. And those merchants in turn turned around and sold him to a man named Potiphar, who happened to be the captain of the guard, or the general of the army, if you will, for the most powerful man in the universe, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. And this is where we pick up our story. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And here's where it's interesting. And the Lord was with Joseph. Now, wait a minute. Hold on here. The Lord was with Joseph? See, if the Lord was with Joseph, then Joseph would be home with his dad. If the Lord was with Joseph, his brothers would be in Egypt building pyramids with no quarters for the Coke machine. If the Lord was with Joseph, he wouldn't be in the situation that he's in right now. I mean, how can the Lord be with you? Look at your minutia-filled life. You drive a foreign car to work. And you come home to a family that you're not sure they even know if you're there. Goes on to say, from the time he was put in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household because of Joseph. Now hold on a second. God blessed the household because of Joseph. To which, if I'm Joseph, I say, that's good. Hey, God, how about you bless me because of me? Not the household because of me. If you're happy with me, if you're pleased with me, how about blessing me? But do you know what he did? Do you know what he did while he was in Potiphar's household? He did what any 17-year-old would do who was ripped into slavery, put in a cistern, taken from his family, who was confident that God was with him. And so, like life, God gives him his first challenge. And one day, Pharaoh's wife is feeling kind of lonely. Joseph. I mean, talk about a lose-lose situation. I mean, there's no clear decision here. You either upset Pharaoh's wife where you could be hung, or you sleep with Pharaoh's wife where you could be hung. There's no win-win here. And so Joseph, in verse 8 and 9, it says, but he refused. You see, with me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns is entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Oh, God. God. You mean the God who's done so much for you lately? The God who allowed you to be sold into slavery in the middle of a no-win situation, God? That God? That's the God that you're choosing to be faithful now to, Joseph? Oh, that God. And do you know what Joseph did? Right then and there? He did what any 17-year-old would do who was pushed into a cistern, sold into slavery, ripped from his family, and put in the middle of a no-win situation, who was confident that God was with him. And you know how he was rewarded for that? The Bible goes on to say that he was framed for rape. Potiphar comes home, throws him in the dungeon. And there he is, just like us, isn't it? Just like us. No Bible, no context, no promise, just a kid alone in a dungeon. And even though God was extraordinarily silent, somehow, and we don't know how, Joseph knew that he was not absent. Listen, there was no Bible, no prophecy, no grand revelation. He didn't know that he was part of some larger plan. But while Joseph was there in the prison, verse 20, the Lord was with him. Now, I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to sound sacrilegious. You know what I wrote in my Bible, in the margins there? In my Bible, if you look in the margins, it says, "So what? I don't want the Lord to be with me in prison because I'm in prison. How about you go be with somebody else for a little while? Maybe my brothers, they could use some of your company." And what the scripture is telling us here is though God was extremely silent, he was not absent. And do you know what Joseph did? He did what any young man would do who was thrown into a cistern, pushed into slavery, ripped from his family, put in the middle of a no-win situation only to be framed for rape and thrown in the dungeon, who was confident that God was with him. And then you're not going to believe this. I couldn't make this up if I tried. Genesis 39:21. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. That's it? Listen, let me tell you something. If it's a good day when the prison warden is your best friend, things are not looking up in your universe. Do you understand me? What you got going on big, Joseph? Me and the prison warden, woo! We're tight. We're on a first-name basis, me and the warden. But isn't that our lives? Just the mundane. Here's another Monday. Here's another day in traffic. Here's another real estate deal, another fight with the wife or husband, another blow up with the kids, another misunderstanding by your parents. And do you know what Joseph did there? Do you know why he found favor in Potiphar's eyes? Do you know why the warden came to find favor with him as well? Why, no matter how bad the circumstances got, God was always able to keep the story alive, keep it moving forward. Because Joseph did what anybody would do, who was thrown into a cistern, ripped from his family, thrown into slavery, put in the middle of a no-win situation, framed for rape, only to be rewarded by finding favor in the eyes of the warden, who was confident that God was with him. And then a glimpse of hope. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker, sounds like a nursery rhyme, of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, put them in the custody in the house of the captain of the guard, who's Potiphar, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. So here's what's going on. The two most trusted men in Pharaoh's kingdom, the man who's the cupbearer, who's responsible for tasting and testing the food to make sure it's not contaminated or poisoned, and the baker whose job is to prepare the food, got on his bad side, ticked him off, so he threw him in the dungeon. And now Joseph has company. And while they were in this cell, these two guys had dreams, and they couldn't figure them out. And Joseph says, I can interpret dreams. I can interpret dreams. Shoot, give them to me. So they tell him. And Joseph says, okay, so here's what's going to happen. In 3 days, Mr. Cupbearer, you're out of here. But I need you to do me a favor. I need you to put in a good word for me on the outside. Put in a good word for me in the house of the Pharaoh. And then so Joseph begins to tell him his story, how he was framed for rape, how his brothers were just jealous of him. He goes on to tell him his story that I don't belong here. I'm a good guy. Old Murphy came knocking. You ever been there? You're just trying to do the right things. Just trying to do what you think God wants. And it seems self-destructive almost. And here's what happens, because look, this is a different sermon, okay? But how difficult would it have been for the guy to tell Pharaoh, look, here's this guy, Joseph, he knows how. How difficult. And in those moments, you're saying, you don't know, okay, all I need, here, Lord, here's the deal, Lord. Here. Listen. Here's the deal. Here's all I need. I need this one interview, this one closing, this one relationship, this one sale. God, this is so simple, even I understand this. Here's the deal, just listen, let me explain. All you have to do is, it's not going to be hard. It's not going to tax your energy. The lights in heaven aren't going to dim. You ever prayed that prayer? God, that's not even a miracle. It's just circumstance. Just like sneeze and send everything that way. You ever been there? Oh, I've prayed that prayer. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. What you got going on big, Joseph? Nothing. I got nothing. I'm in prison. My best friend's the warden, and I'm going to probably be here the rest of my life. Oh, but we got some big things going on over in Cell Block 3. Woo, we caught a rat this big. You should see the plumbing job we did over there. Listen, because it's the microcosm. Listen, God is saying, just because you don't see it, doesn't mean it ain't happening. Just because you don't understand, doesn't mean there's no sense to it. Just because you can't interpret the circumstances doesn't mean that there isn't a divine interpretation. Just because it's another minutia, another deal and another bill and another fight and another marriage and another. Just because it seems like that life is going nowhere fast, you need to understand something, that God is with you. And it's our responsibility not to understand what he's doing. This is it. Listen to me. This is it. If you can catch this, you will never need another self-help sermon again. This is it. Listen to me. All you have to do is wake up every morning and ask the question, what would someone like me do who were in my shoes in these circumstances? And they were confident that God was with me. I'm just going to do that, God, and tomorrow I'm going to wake up and ask the question, with this life, with these kids, with this job, with these physical limitations, with this need, with this debt, with this sickness, with this wealth, because though God is awfully silent, he is not absent. Though the cupbearer forgot Joseph, God did not. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Standing by the Nile, when out of the river came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt. And those cows that were ugly ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Now I read this passage, and I wrote in my margins, fire the new baker. The chili is not settling well with you. Some fat cows came out of the river. Some ugly cows showed up and ate them. Ooh, Stephen King wrote that. The Bible tells us that he sat in the dungeon, Joseph, for 2 more years when Pharaoh had this dream. The story goes on to tell us that Pharaoh calls in all the important people to try and interpret the dream, to try and figure out what's happening. Nobody could do it. And then finally, the cupbearer goes, oh yeah, Pharaoh, so a few years back, you kind of flew off the handle about the Parmesan cheese, threw me into the dungeon, and I met this dude named Joseph. He can interpret. It only took him 2 years. So Pharaoh calls for Joseph. They pull him out of the dungeon. They clean him up. They shave his beard, and they put him in front of him. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. This is it. This is it. Are you ready? This is it. Because this is for those of you whose life is on the other side of the pendulum, whose life is on an upswing. This is the deal. This is the contract. This is the job. This is the transfer, the money. This is the woman, the conventure capitalist. This is where you go home and say, honey, this is the deal. If they sign and we sign, if they say yes, if we say yes, if they offer and we accept, this is it. This is your one and only chance. Do not screw it up. And now Joseph looks at the most powerful man in the universe, who thinks he's God, by the way, and says, I cannot do it. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. Here's your sign. That was it. Your one and only ticket. You can't do it. And to add insult to injury, he goes on to say, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. I can picture the servant's reaction right now, can't you? They're standing there watching this all transpire. Ooh. Na na. Na 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 na. Hey. Goodbye. Everybody. Na na. Na 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 na, hey, goodbye. He looks at him and basically says, my God's smarter than your God. Me and my God, we've been running the dungeon for the last 13 years. Woo! You've been down there lately? Woo, me and the warden, we're like that. You don't talk about God now. You say, wait, you need a dream interpreted? I'm the dream man. What kind of dream you need? I got lots of dreams. What do you want? Just pick one. You don't talk about God now. But do you know why Joseph said what he said? Do you know why he responded the way that he did? Because that's what you do when you've been thrown into a cistern, sold into slavery, ripped from your family, put in a no-win situation, framed for rape, thrown in the dungeon, rewarded by only finding favor in the eyes of the warden, put in front of the most powerful man in the world, and you are confident that God is with you. So Pharaoh says, all right, I'll bite. Shoot. So Pharaoh tells him the dream. And Joseph says, I can interpret. Here we go. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. You writing this down? Make sure you're writing this down. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And in that 7 years of plenty, don't bring all the food back here. You need to harvest all the excess. But don't bring it back here. Spread it out to your major cities so that in the 7 years of famine, the people have to come to you. Are you writing this down? Write this down. Okay? In the 7 years of famine, people are going to come to you, and they're going to be, you think they love you now? Just wait until the 7 years of famine, they got to come find you. And you got all this excess laying around that you've been storing away. Oh, and by the way, you're going to need somebody to run this whole operation. Personally, I think there's a parallel to running the dungeon in an entire country. And in verse 40, Pharaoh says, all right, you shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders, and only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh says, I've known you for all about 30 minutes now. Yep, 30 minutes. That's about right. We're going to go ahead and put you in charge of, everything. Anybody got a problem with that? And I can picture all the servants going, no, we don't got a problem with that. We've only been serving you your whole life. Sure, put the new Hebrew kid in charge. That's fine. No problems here. Do you know what Joseph did then? He's the second most powerful man in the world. He got wealth. He's got everything that he could want. And do you know what he did? Even when coming face to face with his brothers again, he could have punished them, thrown them into the dungeon, gotten back at them. Do you know what he did? He did exactly what anybody would do who was thrown into a cistern, ripped from his family, sold into slavery, put in the middle of a no-win situation, framed for rape, who is now the most powerful man in the world, who was confident that God was with them, and the God who was silent but never absent accomplished his will to create a nation within a nation from whom the Messiah of the whole world would come from. And the main character never knew he was even part of the story. All he knew was God was with him. And so what do you do? What do I do? 'Cause I'm wrestling through this right now. In those circumstances, if you're confident that God is with you, let me ask you this. Do you know what God wants to accomplish through your life? The correct answer is nope. Do you know how many people he wants to influence through you? Nope. Do you know what hangs in the balance of you getting up, walking out of here today and saying, I'm not going to try and figure the whole thing out or leverage or manipulate what I want. Today, I'm just going to live my life the way anyone would who were in my shoes and were confident that God was with them. Do you know what hangs in the balance for you to live that way? No. Share a verse with you. A lot of you probably have memorized. Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely, say it with me, I am with you always to the very ends of the age. wrong. Because it will. Murphy says it will. What are you going to do? Some of you came in here this morning. How about you? Did you come in here this morning not sure what God's trying to do right now? Totally unsure of the context of his plan for your life and where you're going? Is that you? Maybe you came in here and old Murphy's got a hold on your life right now. Your time, your relationships, your marriage. And perhaps Mr. Murphy's affected your health or the health of somebody that you love. Maybe in this declining marketplace, the financial crisis, old Murphy's got a hold of your job, your finances, your investments. Rest assured that old Mr. Murphy's got things planned for our next pastor. And he's got more planned for this church and its people. Between Joseph and Jesus lived another man. And he put it this way: yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear. For surely you are with me. Father, I thank you for your love and your mercy and your grace and the abundance of things that you've given to me while you're with me that I don't deserve. Father, it's hard enough to get up, to wake up every day and pour that first cup of coffee. And on some of those days, things go wrong right from the start. And for some of those days, they go wrong right when we walk in the door at the end, making everything in between meaningless. Father, I tell you what, although you're really silent, I believe. I'm going to choose to believe every day that you are not absent. I'm going to believe, God, that when I walk out of here today, that with my circumstances, with my life, with the things that have been going on for me lately, and I'm just going to make decisions like a person who's confident that God is with them. And so now with your eyes still closed, I didn't do this in the last service because I was chicken. I'm going to do it here with your eyes still closed. Sometimes God just wants reaction. He just wants momentum. He wants a spark so he has something to work with so that he can fan it into a flame. And for some of you sitting there right here, right now, you haven't been too confident that he's been with you. Or maybe you've been rejecting him completely because you found him to be silent and you thought it was absence. And so here, right now, if you know that you need to take some steps to walk out of here today in some areas in your life, or maybe maybe this morning, you've got to give it all over. Maybe it's time to stop messing around like I discovered all those years ago. Maybe it's time to stop blaming circumstance. And maybe it's time for me to take a chance that God is with me. So if that's you, whether it's a little bitty circumstance, or whether it's the whole thing, with everybody's eyes still closed, I want you to stand right now. And I want everybody else to just sit there. I don't want you to look up. I just want you to say, there are some people standing, God, and I'm going to pray for them right now. I'm going to pray that you are with them to the very ends of the age, to the very end of this campus, to the ends of their home, to the end of town, to the end of the world. for those of you standing with your eyes closed for one whole song, you're just going to keep saying the words over and over and over. I'm confident you're with me. I'm confident you're with me. You're silent, but you're not absent. I'm confident you're with me here, and you're with me now.